Welcome back to the future. Uh, I'm the Reverend Scott Denman, Rector of St. John's Episcopal Church in Oakland, California. And this series connects our past through people who have had profound connections with St. John's, who are now doing ministry elsewhere in the country. And it's my great pleasure on this episode to welcome the Reverend Kathleen Moore with us, and she is the Transitional Deacon at St. James Episcopal Church in Arlington, Vermont, and she's also the Communication Manager for Canticle Communications. So it's so great to have you on this series, Kathleen.
It is so good to be here. Have a little bit of St. John's.
Well, we miss you so much, and share for those of who are relatively new to St. John's. Share a little bit about what you were at St. John's for 2 years as you were doing your work at the seminary, CDSP, and what are some of the memories you have, or that put a smile on your face?
Yeah, I mean, I always tell people that back here in Vermont, St. John's, Oakland is that place that Kathleen's always talking about. So I think they know how wonderful you all are, but there might be a little bit of frustration because I am so oft talking about my really great memories at this place. I mean, I think probably at the top of the list would have to be walking on stilts.
Walking on stilts.
I still have right here, always in my office, I have the signs as a reminder for sure. That was an incredible day, and also just kind of represents for me really just the whole feel of St. John's that was so important to me. That feeling of sort of togetherness and community and love and not taking yourselves too seriously, and taking care of one another and getting things done. It was just all sort of there in that day, and that permission to have fun, which not every Episcopal church has. I don't know if you're aware.
Well, I think there is a lot of laughter at St. John's, and we really embrace that sense of humor. For those of you that it may sound strange that she was walking on stilts, she was actually walking on stilts because on an annual basis, for our annual meeting, we do a big children's sermon, and we have two sets of stilts now, where we do some kind of story about being big and being small, and it's I remember, Kathleen, you jumping at the opportunity to walk on stilts, and it really was fun. How would you, knowing what you know of St. John's, how can we leverage our kind of unique way of doing things in this current crisis, and you have any thoughts about that?
I do. There are a couple things about St. John's that I've been thinking about. I, like probably everyone, have been thinking a whole lot about last Easter. And so, of course, for me, last Easter was with St. John's. And y'all have probably been having the same conversation that the power went out. And at the time last year, that felt like this big deal. Talk about perspective. And what I remember most about it, though, is the power went out, and in my head, I was going to all these places of anxiety and worry and fear, and you and St. John's just rolled with it. And that was that was a huge lesson throughout my time at St. John's that I take with me into ministry, I hope. I hope for the rest of my career, that sense of rolling with it. There was never a moment where anyone at St. John's had any thought that Easter wasn't happening because the lights went out, right? Like, that was not on the table. And so that was already this like meaningful lesson to me about Easter. Like, Easter happened without the light, without the sound system, without all of that. It happened, and it felt good and right and maybe better and more moving. And so I think that sort of St. John's quality of being able, man, you're a place that can roll with it, with floods and fires and power outages.
People are getting very interested now, hearing about floods and fires and,
Right, right.
and all of these being true.
Yeah.
The church has rolled through the Oakland Hills fire. It had a flood that devastated our building. And we don't think these are pestilences from God, but we
No. And you don't let it stop you. And I think that it has struck me that is a huge asset that St. John's has. I hope that it's embracing that's so a quality already of the culture there, just rolling with it and doing things sort of, okay, we can't do this, we're going to move on, and we're not going to spend an hour talking about whether we're going to move on. We're just going to move on and do Zoom or do whatever we're going to do. So that's one thing that's occurred to me about St. John's in this period. And the other is, when I think about St. John's, one of the values there that always struck me was that the people of that church are church. Like, there is no church at St. John's without the people. And so I think I've watched some congregations struggle to come to the realization that a priest standing at the altar in a building by themselves, with no other sort of accompanying content, is not actually church. But St. John's didn't struggle with that. From that first Sunday, it was the worship lounge, and I mean, truly, and you were very clear in your introduction that, like, we can't really have church because you're not here. You are required for church. And I think that sense of what church is and is not, and the fact that St. John's already has that value so strongly held, is also probably an asset in this time. It's not a place that strikes me that anyone thinks that the building is church. It is a place that I think people really understand already, that the life of the parish is church. So.
Well, those are really helpful and encouraging insights. I'm so grateful for you reflecting that back to us. I had forgotten that the lights went out last Easter, but
really?
I mostly feel in the dark all the time anyway, so I might not have noticed. But one of the phrases, actually, we stole it from a different church that was using. We loved it. Is the church has left the building, and of course that is our mission call. That the building may be a rallying point, but it's not the focus. Well, tell me, what are you doing? What's it like in your positions? How are you responding to this very amazing time?
So this is probably the closest thing to a day off I have gotten in weeks. We are very busy at Canonical Communications. This has been quite a ride. We at Canonical have, for those who don't know, we're a communications firm, and almost all of our clients are in some way connected to the Episcopal Church. So we have a number of dioceses, we have parishes and organizations within the Episcopal Church that are our clients. And so when this thing started to hit, we had a lot of work on our hands. And we also do crisis communications as well. And this is sadly a time when that's in need as well, especially sort of in those early days of how do we communicate if we had church and we've now learned that someone may have been contagious and things like that. So we've been doing a lot of working with bishops and with priests and other church leaders, helping navigate this, helping communicate about it. And there has been so much more communicating needing to be done. especially like that kind of digital communications, because there are no announcements at church on Sunday. This is Sharmi. So yes, it has been.
It was canticle communication, not catechal communication.
Yeah. Maybe we should consider that catechal, like that. Catechetical communication. So yeah, so we've been really through the ringer busy. I will be honest about that. But it's good work. It feels like good work. It's been rewarding to help to sort of walk with different groups and different organizations in the church to find their way through this.
Wow.
Yeah, so yeah, and then back on the home front, I've been helping both my parish, and then also because my diocese is a client of Canticle Communications, I've been helping my diocese shift all of our worship and our lives to online worship. And then also in terms of my parish life, I mean, I've been learning to use the telephone in ways that I just have never, my generation just is not that comfortable with. But, people I see in a nursing home regularly, I have had to learn to pick up the phone, and I've had to learn to make sure that, that when we do offer online worship, especially here in Vermont, where we have an older population, that we do not ever want to offer a worship opportunity that can't be dialed into, and those kinds of things. So
that's great. What, as we talk about going back, I don't think we're really ever going to go back, even if we could. And this concept of, rather than recovering, discovering, what do you have to say about what we don't want to return to, and what we could move forward towards as a church?
Yeah, I think a little bit of what I've been thinking about is a bit like what I talked about St. John's strengths in sort of not confusing the building with the church. But I think that every Episcopal church, every church probably has some level of that. And I think what this moment is doing, I think it's one of those, it's revealing so much. This crisis is revealing so much about so many things, but I think on a congregation to congregation basis, it's really revealing how much each place has or has not become something that leans on the building and the tradition. And so I think that what we don't want to go back to is confusing our beautiful liturgical traditions and our beautiful buildings with church. I think that that's like a really important lesson I hope we hold on to coming forward, that it sounds cliche because we've been saying it for years that the church is not the building, but right now we're actually having to live that. And I think for places where in this period they've found themselves feeling so empty and like they're no longer there, then I think coming out of this crisis, they're going to really need to be asking themselves some questions about who they are and what work they need to do going forward. Because if you're not if you don't have a whole lot of work to do, again, picking up the phone and calling and feeling very much like that's church, then something was already amiss before COVID-19. And I think that there's going to be some reckoning with that going forward.
Wow, that's very well said. I was actually my Easter sermon, I expressed a feeling of being troubled by this yearning to have some big Easter service when we all return, which, I love a party like everybody else, but it occurred to me that that was not the thing that was holding up Easter or making Easter not happen. And I was struck by thinking of the disciples as being in lockdown.
Yes.
That they were frightened, hidden, and they weren't ultimately waiting for it to be safe.
No.
they were discovering something about themselves in all of this process. So, but speaking about St. John's and our lack of attachment to maybe our architecture and building, but also maybe a little lack of connection with our liturgy. We're prone to experimenting with
Yes.
things that sometimes people feel is offensive, but trying some new things. We're so intrigued with the gift that you brought to the church in terms of engaging us in liturgical refreshment and renewal, and given that this is the time when our church is really looking at perhaps the publication of a new prayer book or new liturgies, would you be willing to lead an adult education series that we could do live on what's happening at the national level liturgically? What things can we be doing and be thinking through as we seek to be more relevant in the way we do worship? Is that something that you would be willing to do?
Oh, you know it. You know I like to talk about anything, especially with St. John's people. So of course.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that. And thank you again. It's so great to see you. We miss you dearly, and think of you often. And thank you for being a part of this and a clearly busy schedule. Before we started, Kathleen said she was doing, what were you saying, 2 services a
Two
day?
services a day.
That
Yep.
you were managing the technology for that? So you're amazing. Thank you for taking the time to do this, and everyone out there, look forward to stay tuned for a series that we'll offer live with Kathleen on liturgy and what's happening at the national level and the way we can be involved in it. So again, thank you, Kathleen, for being with us today.
Thank you. I miss you all, St. John's. Be well. Bye.
Take care.